On the first wedding night, I crawled under the bed, wanting to prank my husband. But someone else entered the room and put the phone on speaker. What I heard made me freeze. And before we begin, I have my traditional request. Tell me where you came from to visit us. It's always touching to see how many of us have gathered. Enjoy the listening. 10 years before this night, 22-year-old Snezana sat by her mother's bedside in a private ward of the oncology center, where 4 drips quietly counted down the last days of Rima Nikolovna Shevtsova, once an energetic woman who founded a charitable fund to help orphan children, and now turned into a shadow of herself, emaciated to unrecognizability. Outside the window, the noise of Svetlogorsk, the resort town, could be heard. People laughed on the embankment, sellers of amber trinkets called out to tourists, but here, in the sterile silence of the ward, time had stopped. Aunt Zina, whispered her mother, and her voice was so weak that Snezana leaned closer, catching every word. My dear sister and Valia, my friend from the institute, I took her as a witness at the wedding. They took the money from the fund, transferred it to their accounts, forged reports. Mom, don't talk about this now. Snezana tried to stop her. You must understand, Rima Nikolovna said with difficulty, turning her head. Money is a magnifying glass, it shows people's true nature. But sometimes this glass burns before you can see the truth. Promise me that. Mom. Find someone who will love only you, not for the Shevtsova surname, not for the shares in the combine, not for the amber in Svetlogorsk. You understand? Only you. Snezana promised, and her mother's fingers etched this promise into her deeper than any prayer, becoming part of her essence, defining her entire future life. Her father raised her differently from how daughters are raised in wealthy families, where princesses are prepared for advantageous matches and social receptions. Fyodor Karatanovich Shevtsov, the general director of the Amber holding Baltic Amber, a man who built an empire from the ruins of a Soviet combine, did not take Snezana to balls and receptions. He sat her next to him during negotiations, taught her to read contracts between the lines, showed where traps hide in innocuous formulations, and how to distinguish an honest partner from a fraudster by their manner of conversation. They smell money like sharks smell blood in the water, he said when his daughter started dating men. To them, you're not a woman, not a person, not a soul. You're a lottery ticket with a guaranteed win. And Snezana created a disguise for herself, carefully thought out, verified down to the smallest details. She moved from the family mansion with a sea view to a shabby one-room apartment in the Baltic district, where neighbors made noise in the evenings and the stairwell walls were covered with dampness. She got a job as an office manager in a transport company for 40,000 rubles, drove an inconspicuous foreign car with a dented fender, though with a boosted engine underneath. That was her little weakness, a reminder of who she really was. During the day, she clipped discount coupons, counted change at the supermarket, wore clothes from mass market stores, and at night, she managed an investment portfolio that brought in more than her official boss earned in a year. Vadim appeared in her life on a rainy Tuesday near the cathedral, when Snezana was returning from work after a particularly tough week. Her boss yelled about lost invoices, neighbors flooded the bathroom, and she just wanted to get home, drink tea, and forget everything. She dropped her wallet right into a puddle. It slipped from her wet fingers and plopped into the dirty water by the curb. A man in a worn jacket, standing nearby, bent down faster than she could react, picked it up, wiped off the dirt with his own sleeve without flinching at getting dirty, and handed it to her with a smile that took her breath away. Vadim, he introduced himself, not averting his gaze. Sales manager at a car dealership. Barely meeting my quota, to be honest. Snezana, office manager. Not exactly mountains of gold either. They went to drink coffee in the nearest cafe, a small one with fogged-up windows and worn chairs, where he ordered the cheapest Americano, and she did the same, though the card in her secret pocket could buy the entire establishment outright. You know, he said, stirring sugar, I don't care if I'll ever be rich or not. I want a normal life. Sunday breakfasts, some shaggy dog, a person with whom you can just sit in silence in the evening without it being awkward. That was the password, the access code to a heart that had held its defenses for so long, not letting anyone close. For 2 years, he passed her unspoken tests without a single mistake, not a single slip. He never asked for money, even when, by his words, his car broke down or his salary ran out. He gave her wildflowers from the Curonian spit, cornflowers, daisies, some unknown herbs, explaining that he couldn't afford roses but considered these more beautiful, more honest. He clipped coupons with her, and it didn't look humiliating or performative. Look, 20% off on cereal, he said seriously, handing her a newspaper clipping. You're crazy, she laughed. I'm thrifty, those are different things. When her car broke down, he made a 40-minute detour every morning for a whole week, waking up at 5:30 to drive her to work on time. You're insane, she said. That's gas, time. Your time spent with you doesn't count as wasted, he replied so sincerely that she melted. Snezana introduced him to her father, who masterfully played the role of a retired foreman, supposedly arriving from a sanatorium in Crimea, in an old jacket and with speech deliberately sprinkled with folksy words. After dinner in a cheap cafe on the outskirts, where Snezana deliberately took them both, Fyodor Karatanovich pulled his daughter aside. Good guy, he said quietly so Vadim wouldn't hear, but too soft. Listens to his mother. Dad, respect for parents is a virtue. Respect and submission are different things, daughter. She brushed it off, attributing it to her father's eternal suspicion. Back then, it seemed like nitpicking, nothing more. Vadim's mother, Larissa Arkadayevna, lived in a cramped two-room apartment in the Moscow district, cluttered with crystal vases and souvenirs from the 90s, yellowed photos in frames, and knitted doilies on every horizontal surface. At their first meeting, she eyed Snezana from head to toe, slowly and appraisingly, like inspecting a stain on new upholstery, with disgusted bewilderment. My Vadya is special, she said instead of a greeting, without offering tea or a seat at the table. He deserves better. Tell me, office manager, that's basically a secretary, right? I understand how much they pay there. Enough. Enough for what? Snezana replied, hiding a smile behind a mask of modest humility. 4 stockings? If only you knew, she thought then with secret triumph. If only you knew. And she imagined how, after the wedding, she would reveal the truth, how her mother-in-law's face would stretch in astonishment, how disdain would instantly turn to fawning and fussy politeness. A naive dream of someone who still believed in justice. The wedding preparations turned into an endless series of manipulations, one more sophisticated than the next. Larissa Arkadayevna insisted on a huge guest list, 120 people, half of whom Snezana had never seen, explaining it as necessary to maintain the Yakovlev family image. She constantly offered to pay for flowers, musicians, or hall decorations, but each time her card wouldn't go through, her wallet was left at home, or the money got stuck in bank transfers. What a nuisance, Larissa Arkadayevna sighed, demonstratively rummaging in her purse. Probably another system error. Never mind, I'll pay, Snezana said, pulling out a tested card with no limit. Vadya, what an understanding bride you have. The wedding cost 2,800,000 rubles, a trifle by the standards of her real wealth, but Snezana kept count of every accidental card failure, every forgotten wallet, every sigh of regret that cost nothing. She thought it was a temporary inconvenience, that everything would change after the wedding. She didn't understand that they were methodically testing her strength, squeezing out as much as possible from the poor girl with an inheritance from her grandmother. 3 months before the wedding, Angelina appeared, Vadim's best childhood friend, whom he had somehow never mentioned before. A tall blonde in tight dresses, with a loud laugh and a habit of constantly touching Vadim's arm during conversation, adjusting his collar, brushing off invisible specks from his shoulder. Remember our trip to Poland after graduation? She asked, barely glancing at Snezana. All turned toward Vadim. That bar in Gdansk where you sang karaoke, and the waiter brought us champagne for bravery. Ladochka, you look stunning, Larissa Arkadayevna admired, and her eyes shone in a way they never did when greeting Snezana. Snezana, maybe Lena can take you shopping, pick something more interesting. Snezana felt a sharp, unpleasant sting of jealousy but drove it away, calming herself with obvious facts. She had the ring on her finger. She had the man Angelina was a ghost from the past, nothing more. Snezana found the apartment herself, a 4-room one in a historic building from the early century, with high ceilings, stucco, and a view of old chestnuts, for 22 million rubles. She told Vadim she got it from her grandmother's inheritance, and this half-truth allowed her not to reveal all her cards. Vadya should handle the purchase himself. Larissa Arkadayevna intervened immediately, and a new businesslike note appeared in her voice. Run the money through his account, sign all the documents, negotiate with the seller, so he feels like the owner, the head of the family, so the neighbors respect him. Mom's right, Vadim supported. It's a matter of my male pride. Snezana agreed she wanted him to feel like a provider, a real man. But she wasn't a fool. Her lawyer, Uliana Makeva, a woman with 30 years of experience and a reputation as a bulldog in a skirt, drew up the papers so that ownership rights belonged entirely and unconditionally to Snezana. The money passed through Vadim's account for appearance's sake, but legally, he had no claim to the apartment, not a single square centimetre. Vadim signed the documents without reading the fine print. He saw only the figures in his account and already considered himself the owner. And then came the wedding night. 6 hours of dancing, toasts to the young couple's happiness, handshakes with people whose names Snezana didn't remember and would never remember. She went up to the room earlier than her husband, still in her wedding dress, whose lace scratched her skin under the arms and left red stripes. The silly idea came on its own, born from fatigue and a strange childish desire to start a new life with something fun. Hide under the bed, jump out when Vadim entered, laugh together at her foolishness. She crawled under the high hotel bed, pressing the puffy hem to herself, and froze in the darkness, inhaling dust. The lace caught on the carpet pile, the corset dug into her ribs. 32 years old, owner of a fortune her mother-in-law didn't even suspect, and hiding under the bed like a teenage girl. The door opened, but it wasn't Vadim who entered. The room filled with the heavy, cloying scent of perfume that Larissa Arkadayevna always used, and Snezana pressed herself to the floor, stopping her breath. Footsteps sounded, the rustle of fabric, the dull thud of a phone on the bedspread right above her head. "Hello, Tamara," her mother-in-law's voice said, turning on speaker. "Everything's going according to plan. This fool suspects nothing. And if she's not as much of a fool as she seems?" A woman's voice asked from the speaker. "A country bumpkin, I tell you. Reads books on weekends instead of making useful connections. Dresses like a student on a stipend. A pompous empty-headed girl who thinks she's grabbed God by the beard. They'll live a year or a year and a half, enough for the marriage to look real. Then Varja will start complaining about her everywhere. We'll arrange scandals. She'll run away herself, unable to take it. We have receipts the apartment money went through his account. We'll take it through the courts. Where will this secretary get money for a good lawyer?" Snezana covered her mouth with her hand, feeling her fingers grow cold, her whole body numb. The door opened again, letting in new footsteps. "Varja," her mother-in-law's voice instantly warmed. "How's Lena? Her lease ends in 6 months. The owner is selling the apartment. What will you do? That's why we need to speed up, Mom. I can't let her sleep on her sister's couch forever." A pause. "Besides, the child needs a room." Snezana pressed her palm to her lips so hard she tasted the salty flavor of blood from biting the inside of her cheek. "A child? Angelina is pregnant? Vadim is the father? We'll redo that awful blue bedroom into a nursery." Larissa Arkadayevna continued businesslike, already planning the future. "When this one leaves. Lots of light there, windows to the south. Mom, sorry it turned out this way, that you have to endure." Vadim's voice sounded guilty, but not in the way Snezana expected to hear, not at all. "Snezana is boring, Mom. Reads her books, sits at home in the evenings. No connections, no useful acquaintances for me, though she seems to have money. You endured, son, you're great. All this for the future. She's bland, Mom, bland like Kefi." Under the bed, in the darkness and dust, Snezana closed her eyes, and 2 years of her life flashed before her. 2 years of pretense that she thought was love. She remembered how she hid designer dresses in the far corner of the closet so he wouldn't feel poor next to her, how she pretended not to know about wines, ordering in restaurants what he did, how she avoided talks about business, finances, investments, though she could speak about them for hours, so he wouldn't feel insignificant beside her. She dimmed her light, hid her connections with officials and directors, turned into a bland, boring, grey woman because she thought he wanted simple, honest, real love. Kefi, he called her Kefi. She became Kefi for a man who all this time planned to throw her out of her own home and move in a pregnant mistress. Her fingers found the phone in her dress pocket. She had absent-mindedly slipped it there when going up to the room, and now, trying not to move, not to breathe, Snezana silently activated the recorder, covering the screen with her palm so the glow wouldn't give her away. The red bar crawled across the screen, counting seconds, and every word spoken above her head settled into the device's memory, turning from air into evidence, gossip into a verdict. "Speak louder," she thought with an icy fury that surprised even her. "Give me everything." Larissa Arkadayevna suddenly fell silent, and Snezana heard the creak of springs. Her mother-in-law leaned toward the edge of the bed, and Snezana's heart stopped for a moment. Something glittered on the carpet in a strip of light from the window, and a hand with long, manicured nails painted dark burgundy descended centimeters from Snezana's face, groped the floor, barely missing her cheek, and picked up a pearl earring, the very one that fell from her ear when Snezana crawled under the bed. Some trinket, Larissa Arkadayevna muttered, and Snezana heard the clink of the earring on the nightstand. Probably costume jewelry from previous guests. The maids don't clean at all. The earring cost 80,000 rubles, a gift from her father for her 30th birthday, but Snezana didn't allow herself even a mental smirk because she was too busy not fainting from relief. Vadya, tomorrow first thing, transfer half the wedding money to my account. Her mother-in-law's voice became businesslike again, and notes of someone accustomed to giving orders rang in it. About 300,000. Pull the rest gradually, in small amounts, so that at divorce, the joint account is empty, and there's nothing to divide. Okay, Mom. And today. A pause during which Snezana heard her mother-in-law rummaging in someone's purse. In her purse, she realized with horror. You have to sleep with her. Mom, I don't want to. Her voice became firm, brooking no argument. Intimate relations will complicate annulling the marriage if this fool tries that route. We need a divorce with property division, not annulment. Understand the difference? Otherwise, she'll keep everything. Snezana heard the man to whom she had vowed love less than 3 hours ago agree to fulfilling marital duty like an unpleasant but necessary chore. Take out the trash, pay a bill, sleep with his wife for the sake of a 22 million ruble apartment. I took the spare room key from her purse, Larissa Arkadayevna added. This fact of intrusion, this brazen rummaging in someone else's things, sent chills over Snezana's entire body. Just in case. A year, Vadya, and you're free. Vadim mumbled something in response and collapsed on the bed right above Snezana's head, so the spring sagged almost to her nose, and she felt his weight with her whole body. A minute later, he was snoring the champagne had taken its toll. And Snezana lay in the darkness and dust, inhaling his scent, waiting until enough time passed to crawl out unnoticed. She emerged from under the bed 10 minutes later, moving more cautiously than ever in her life, freezing after each movement and listening to her husband snoring. Her dress was grey from dust, her makeup smeared with black streaks on her cheeks, but her eyes in the mirror looked clear and cold, like her father's before a hostile takeover of a competing company. And for the first time in her life, Snezana recognized his features in her reflection. She took off the wedding dress, symbol of her blindness, her foolish faith in a fairy tale, and threw it into the corner without caring about the 300,000 it cost. She pulled on jeans and a hoodie from a suitcase, went down the stairs, bypassing the elevator to avoid running into any guests, got into her inconspicuous car with the boosted engine, and called her father. Dad, she said, and her voice didn't tremble though everything inside burned. You were right about everything. Wake Uliana, I'm heading to Svetlogorsk. We are going to war. The 40-minute drive along the night highway by the sea she covered in 20 minutes, squeezing everything the engine could give, and the motor sang at high revs the song she had hidden from everyone for so long. On the porch of the mansion, under the lit lanterns, her father waited in a robe with an unlit cigar in his fingers and worry in his eyes, and Uliana Makeva, partner in one of Kaliningrad's largest law firms, capable of tearing opponents apart in court with her bare hands, stood in pajamas with kittens but with an open laptop on her knees, ready to work until morning. Fyodor Karatanovich looked at his daughter's dusty hoodie, her compressed lips, and reddened eyes, and didn't say what he had every right to say, didn't utter a single reproach. He simply hugged her tightly, like in childhood after nightmares, and Snezana allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to be a little girl whose world had collapsed. Then she pulled away and straightened her shoulders. They planned this. Vadim, his mother, and Angelina, from the beginning. They want the apartment. Angelina is pregnant by him. She played the recording. Larissa Arkadayevna's voice filled the living room, echoing off the high ceilings. This fool suspects nothing. Country bumpkin, pompous, empty-headed girl. When the recording ended on the words bland like kafe, her father's face turned into a mask of such fury that Snezana had seen only once, when he learned of Aunt Zina and Valya's betrayal, robbing his dying wife. He snapped the cigar in half tobacco spilled onto the parquet. I'll drown him. I'll call the car dealership director by lunch. He'll be thrown out on the street. I'll evict his mother from the apartment by noon. I have connections in the management company. No, Dad, wait. What do you mean no? I want. Not quick revenge, not instant satisfaction. Snezana sat opposite Uliana, who was already typing something, and her voice was calm. I want total destruction. Let them think they're winning. Let them relax and lose caution. Then yank the rug out from under them so hard they never get up again. Uliana lifted her head from the laptop and smiled for the first time that evening, a predator's smile scenting prey. The apartment is legally yours, we know that. The documents are ironclad, she began, bending her fingers. But they're sure they have rights because the money went through his account. We'll use that. Slip him a prenup disguised as an insurance policy. How exactly? We'll say the house has historical value, German pre-war construction, and requires a clean title to reduce insurance risks. Insert a clause in the document about waiving all marital rights to the property in exchange for lowering the insurance premium by $30,000 a month. For a greedy person, that's an irresistible bait. He'll sign without reading, I'll bet my head on it. And finances? Her father asked, already calming down and joining the planning. Leave the joint account with the wedding money as bait. Let them pull from there and feel like winners. Fyodor Karatanovich, if he's not honest with his wife, he's not honest at work. Have your detective check his sales at the dealership, expenses, connections with suppliers. The child. Snezana asked quietly. I need proof of the affair with Angelina. A DNA test is long and complicated. Uliana shook her head. We need a public admission, with witnesses, preferably on camera. Snezana stood and approached the window, behind which the sky over the sea was lightening, painting the water in pink and gold tones of a new day. I'll go back to him. No need, daughter. Her father stepped toward her, and there was a plea in his voice. We'll serve the papers through a lawyer. Divorce in absentia. You don't have to see that goat. He thinks I'm stupid and weak, bland like Kefi. She turned to her father, and there was something new in her eyes, something steely. I'll go back and play the idiot he thinks I am. Gather enough evidence not just for divorce court, but for prison. At dawn, she returned to the hotel, slipped along the corridor, and lay down next to Vadim, who hadn't woken up all night, hadn't noticed her absence, hadn't worried. When he opened his eyes and asked where she had been, Snezana smiled her softest, most loving smile. Downstairs, darling, planning our life. The month that followed became for Snezana an exercise in patience and acting skill she hadn't suspected in herself. She ordered expensive breakfasts to the room without consultation, for 18,000 rubles, including oysters and champagne that no one asked for. She signed them up for spa procedures, a 38,000 non-refundable sum. She accidentally dropped Vadim's phone into an ice bucket, having previously disabled biometrics to access his messages. She cooked dinner, adding salt instead of sugar to baked goods and oversalting meat to inedibility. She washed Vadim's cashmere sweaters in hot water, turning them into child sizes. She forgot to pay the internet bill for 3 days, disrupting his work calls. When they moved into the apartment on Olive Street, she mistakenly washed Larissa Arkadayevna's mink coat with bleach, turning it into a pitiful rag. Are you completely brainless? Her mother-in-law screamed, shaking the ruined fur from which water dripped. 160,000. 160,000 rubles. I just wanted to help. Snezana sobbed in a fake voice that came to her easier each time. I don't know about expensive things, I'm just a simple girl. How would I know? The more she erred, the more confident they became in their superiority, in their rightness, in the inevitability of victory, and the more carelessly they handled words and actions. Irritated Vadim increasingly escaped to Angelina, not even bothering with plausible excuses. The GPS tracker installed by her father's detective on his car recorded every visit, every overnight stay, every minute spent at a foreign address. Meanwhile, the detective uncovered something far more interesting than infidelity. Vadim was involved in a kickback scheme with auto parts suppliers for the Baltic Amber Holding, inflating purchase prices and receiving the difference in cash, which was then transferred in small amounts to his mother's account. The embezzlement amounted to more than 4 million rubles over the last 6 months, and all the correspondence with instructions on structuring transfers to avoid tax attention was saved on the company servers. Snezana brought Vadim the documents waiving rights to the apartment 3 weeks after the coat incident, choosing a moment when he was especially irritated by her latest blunder and wanted to get rid of the conversation quickly. This is from the insurance company, she explained, trying to look guilty and a bit scared. Since the house has historical value, German construction from the early century, the liability insurance is huge, but if you sign the waiver as non-primary owner, The premium drops by $30,000 a month. I thought, since I've spoiled so much. Vadim snatched the papers, skimmed the first page, saw the words waiver of insurance liability highlighted in bold by Uliana especially for this, and missed the paragraph on waiving all marital rights to the property, printed in small font on the third page. At least you're trying to fix your mistakes, he said condescendingly, without even thanking her, and signed boldly at the bottom of each sheet. Snezana watched the ink dry on the paper and felt something click inside. The trap mechanism had triggered, and the door slammed shut forever. She suggested a dinner party a week later as a way to make amends for the ruined coat and all the other misfortunes. I want to invite your mom, her sister, nieces, she said, looking into Vadim's eyes with dog-like devotion, and Angelina too, of course. I want to show I can be a good wife, a good hostess. Vadim agreed with a smirk he didn't even try to hide. Let her embarrass herself in front of everyone, it'll only make the divorce story easier with an inept wife. He didn't know that Uliana had already installed hidden cameras in the living room and dining room, disguised as smoke detectors, and that every word said at that table would be recorded in high resolution. The guests arrived on Saturday evening, dressed up and haughty. Larissa Arkadayevna in a new dress bought with the stolen wedding money wrinkled her nose at the wine Snezana had chosen especially, buying the cheapest in the supermarket. Angelina entered arm in arm with Vadim, in front of his living wife, in a loose dress trying to hide her rounding belly, but Snezana noticed how she unconsciously placed her hand on her stomach, protecting what was growing inside, a gesture that gives away every pregnant woman. "Dear, what is this? Wine from a box?" Larissa Arkadayevna asked mockingly, holding up her glass to the light. "Sorry, I don't know about wines, I took what was there." "It's noticeable. Very, very noticeable." Snezana poured for the guests, smiled, endured the mockery, the exchanged glances, knowing the cameras were capturing every word, every contemptuous look. Then, carrying a carafe to the table, she tripped over a chair leg and spilled red wine right onto Angelina's lap. The wet fabric clung to her belly, exposing the obvious pregnancy, a small one, about 4 months, but undeniable roundness. "What are you doing, you clumsy cow?" Angelina screeched, jumping up and shaking herself off. Vadim rushed to her in one bound, forgetting everything. "Are you okay? Is the baby okay? Do you feel bad?" Silence crashed over the room, heavy and absolute. Vadim froze with his mouth open, realizing what he had just said in front of everyone, including his own wife. Snezana slowly set the carafe on the table and straightened to her full height. For the first time in these weeks, her face was calm and calculating, and the room grew several degrees colder. "Sit down," she said to Larissa Arkadayevna, who had started screaming about country bumpkins and incompetence, habitually raising her voice. "Everyone, and listen to me carefully." She placed on the table a receipt for prenatal vitamins found in Vadim's gym bag, dated last week. Then a copy of the marriage contract where he had personally waived all rights to the apartment for $30,000 in monthly savings. And finally, she said in a voice that made even Larissa Arkadayevna pale, "My father is Fyodor Karatanovich Shevtsov, General Director and main shareholder of the Baltic Amber Holding, that same holding, Vadim, with whose suppliers you've been running kickback schemes for the last 6 months. 4 million rubles, if you're interested in the amount." The front door opened. Uliana had unlocked it remotely from her phone. Into the apartment walked Uliana herself in a strict suit, behind her 2 policemen in uniform and an investigator from the Economic Crimes Department, an older man with a folder of documents in his hands. They lifted Vadim from the table and cuffed his hands behind his back. Article 159. Fraud on an especially large scale, the investigator announced. Article 160. Embezzlement. They lifted Larissa Arkadayevna too, and she squealed, lunging. "I'm not involved. It's all him. I knew nothing." Article 174. Money laundering. The investigator continued unmoved. The kickbacks were transferred to your personal account, Citizen Yakovleva. The correspondence with transfer structuring instructions is saved. Snezana. Vadim lunged toward her, and a policeman intercepted him by the elbow, twisting his arm. "Talk to your father. Withdraw the statement. I'm afraid of prison, I have hypertension. I won't survive there. Please." Snezana looked at him, at this pathetic, weak, cowardly creature who for 2 years pretended to be a loving man, who tried to play predator and lost with a crash. Kefi doesn't have the authority to stop a criminal investigation. Angelina, white as chalk, clutched her belly and turned to Vadim, still not grasping the scale of the disaster. "You promised to take care of us. You said everything would be fine." Snezana looked at her, and there was no hatred in that gaze. She herself had once been in a similar trap. "You have 5 minutes to leave here." He's a liar, Angelina, a professional, talented liar. You're the next victim, you just haven't realized it yet. Run while you can. Angelina ran out of the apartment without looking back, without saying goodbye, and the clatter of her heels on the stairs dissolved into silence, leaving only an echo. The policeman's snap handcuffs on Vadim's wrists metal clinked against metal. This sound seemed to Snezana the most beautiful music she had ever heard. The divorce went quickly, almost routinely. Vadim didn't contest anything, understanding that any resistance would only worsen his position in the criminal trial looming ahead like an inevitable shadow. Snezana kept all the assets, the apartment on Olive Street and, much more importantly, her sense of self-worth, trampled and reborn from the ashes. At the criminal trial in the building of the Kaliningrad Regional Court, Larissa Arkadayevna, sitting on the defendant's bench next to her son, gave testimony against him, trying to soften her own sentence. "He forced me to accept that money," she said, not looking at Vadim. "I didn't understand it was kickbacks, I thought it was his bonuses." Snezana watched Vadim's face at that moment when his own mother betrayed him to reduce a term, and the expression of complete devastation that flashed in his eyes almost evoked pity in her, almost. Vadim got 4 years in a general regime colony. Larissa Arkadayevna got 2 years probation and community service. Snezana walked out of the court building into the sunny light of an October day, and the wind from the sea hit her face, cold and clean. She was 32 years old, divorced, free, and completely alone. The frightened girl who hid under the hotel bed was gone forever, but in her place appeared a woman tempered in the fire of betrayal, and that fire left burns that didn't heal for a long time. The 3 years following the trial turned Snezana into what business circles in Kaliningrad call the Ice Queen of the amber business. She joined her father's holding officially, not as an assistant or director's daughter, but as commercial director, earning the position with sleepless nights over reports and negotiations. She worked 16 hours a day, returned home after dark, and didn't date anyone. Every man who smiled at her aroused immediate suspicion, and she asked herself, does he see her or the millions in amber? Mom or a lottery ticket? Music became her consolation. Snezana bought an antique Steinway piano that took up half the living room in the apartment, and every evening poured out her rage, pain, and loneliness onto the keys. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, composers who understood suffering better than any therapist. Vitaly Tikhomirov appeared at a charity evening in the Kaliningrad Regional Philharmonic when Snezana was 35 and had already resigned herself to the thought that she would remain alone forever. He approached her at the buffet table, where she stood with a glass of champagne and the expression of someone serving a sentence. "You look like you'd prefer a tooth extraction without anesthesia over being here," he said instead of a greeting. Snezana turned. A man about 38, in a suit that fit well but looked slightly worn at the elbows. His hands, she noticed right away, were working hands, with calluses and traces of paint under the nails, not the hands of someone who only signs checks and shakes palms at receptions. "I work as a restorer," he explained, catching her gaze. "Restoring historical buildings. Impossible to wash the hands completely." He persuaded her to go into the empty concert hall where a piano stood and play something, because you look at the instrument like an old friend, and at people like potential enemies. Snezana sat at the piano and played Chopin's Nocturne full of such longing that she herself was surprised where so many unshed tears came from in her. When the last note faded in the empty hall, Vitaly looked at her, not at the jewelry, not at the dress, and asked, "Who hurt you so badly?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that it pierced her armor through. She stood and left, almost ran, without saying goodbye. The next day, a package arrived at her office. A rare album with photographs of pre-war Nigsberg, published in Germany in a tiny print run. The note read, "For the soul, no obligations. Vitaly." For 6 months, they drank coffee in small cafes of the old town, discussed history and restoration, and Vitaly didn't know who her father was for the first 3 months. He thought she was just a high-level manager in some company. When he learned the truth, his reaction was not at all what she expected. "Great," he sighed. "Now I have to worry that people will think I'm a fortune hunter. You know how hard it is to buy a birthday gift for a woman who can buy up all the Baltic amber. For her birthday, He gave her a hand-carved amber figurine of a cat, crooked, clumsy, with one ear larger than the other. "This is my first attempt," he confessed. "You can't buy this because it's priceless in its ugliness." Snezana placed the figurine on the mantel next to expensive statuettes and antique vases. It was the most valuable thing in the room. The turning point came when Fyodor Karatanovich had a heart attack, mild but enough to make Snezana pace the corridor of the regional hospital, not knowing what to do with her hands and thoughts. She tried to send Vitaly home. "It'll be a long night, Go. You have work tomorrow." "Shut up, Snezana," he replied calmly, threw his jacket over her, brought awful coffee from the machine, and held her hand for 12 hours straight, without looking at his phone, without complaining, without sleep. Later, seeing him to his car at dawn when the doctors said her father was out of danger, Snezana asked, "Why are you so kind to me?" "I'm complicated, distrustful, damaged goods." Vitaly stopped in the middle of the hospital parking lot and turned to her. "You're not damaged goods, you're a survivor. I love you, not the heiress, not the director. I want the woman who hides under the bed to prank her husband because she has a playful heart." Snezana froze. She had never told him the story about the bed. "You talk in your sleep," he smiled. Something about dust and a mother-in-law. 2 years later, he proposed on a Tuesday evening while they cooked dinner together in the kitchen of her apartment on Olive Street. "Marry me. I've already signed a prenup. Uliana saw it. It says I leave with what I came. My tools and my stubbornness. I only need you." Snezana looked at him for a long time, searching for lies, hidden motives, a double bottom, found nothing but love. "Yes," she said. "But keep the amber cat for yourself." 5 years passed. Snezana was now the general director of the holding. Her father had passed away peacefully in his sleep a year earlier, never learning of the illness that took him in 3 months. She stood at the window of her office when the secretary reported that some woman downstairs demanded a meeting and was arguing with security. Snezana went down and saw at the entrance a haggard, hunched woman in a worn coat whom she didn't immediately recognize. Larissa Arkadayevna now worked as a cleaner. Snezana knew this from the detective's reports she kept just in case, and looked 20 years older than her age. "I need your help," the former mother-in-law said, and there was no former haughtiness in her voice, only despair. "Genya, my grandson, Vadim, and Angelina's son. He has leukemia. Angelina abandoned the child 2 years ago, ran off with some trucker. Vadim is still in the colony. I have no money for treatment." Snezana looked at the woman who once called her a country bumpkin and pompous, empty-headed girl, who planned to steal her home and ruin her life. She thought of her own daughter Anna, healthy and sleeping at home under the nanny's watch, of her mother who died of cancer and a broken heart but never lost kindness even to those who betrayed her. "I won't give you money," Snezana said. "I don't trust you and never will. But name the hospital. I'll pay for the treatment directly, anonymously, through the holding's charitable fund." Larissa Arkadayevna fell to her knees right on the marble floor of the lobby, and the guards moved to help her up, but Snezana stopped them with a gesture. She felt no triumph, only a strange peace. She hadn't forgiven, but she hadn't let the darkness turn her into a monster. A month later, a letter came from the colony. Vadim requested a meeting, promising to tell why Snezana couldn't get pregnant during their relationship. She stared at the envelope for a long time before deciding. Behind the glass of the visiting room sat the man she once loved, broken, gaunt, in prison garb. Vadim confessed right away, without wasting time on preambles. "You weren't infertile. Mom swapped your medications with regular multivitamins. We didn't want a child that would tie us for 18 years. Planned a clean divorce after taking the apartment. Angelina was supposed to give birth to the real heir." Snezana felt nausea rising in her throat. This wasn't just fraud, it was violence against her body, against her dream of motherhood. "Now you're free," Vadim added with a pathetic attempt at a smile. "If you think about it, it's even a blessing." Snezana left without turning back. Another 10 years passed. 15-year-old Anna, a tall girl with her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, brought home a new boyfriend, Maxim, a broad-shouldered captain of the school basketball team, a charming young man with a white-toothed smile. "I like that you're not obsessed with money like other girls," he said over dinner, and Snezana, hearing this phrase, nearly dropped her fork. She recognized the pattern instantly. It was the predator's first line, the same access code with which Vadim had once opened her heart. "Maxim," she said calmly, "I have a summer job offer for you at the holding. It'll look good on your resume." Maxim beamed until he heard it was about sorting raw amber from 6 in the morning for minimum wage. That's somehow below my level, he grimaced. Anna slowly placed her napkin on the table. My great-grandfather worked at the Combine as a simple craftsman. My father restores buildings with his own hands. Leave, Maxim. Snezana barely held back tears of pride. Her daughter didn't have to hide under a bed to learn the truth. She had absorbed the lesson through example. Larissa Arkadayevna died of cancer in the palliative ward of a district hospital, and a nurse called Snezana because the former mother-in-law had listed her as the emergency contact. There was no one else left. You came, Larissa Arkadayevna whispered, dried to the bone, almost unrecognizable. Why? Because I won, Snezana replied without malice. It was a simple fact. I envied your light, the dying woman admitted. I wanted to steal it, but only got burned. Larissa Arkadayevna was afraid to die. Snezana took her cold hand. Close your eyes. It's over. Let go. The monitor went silent. Snezana paid for the funeral. That was the last thing she did for the Yakovlev family. Their summer house in Svetlogorsk filled with son and children's laughter. Snezana was 45, 8 years married to Vitaly. Anna, 15, read a book on the terrace with a sea view. 10-year-old Gleb learned to fly a kite with his father on the beach below. Snezana sat in a lounge chair with a glass of wine and thought about the night 20 years ago. Dust under the hotel bed, the words bland like kefi spoken by the man to whom she entrusted her life. She recalled the second when she almost stayed, thinking, maybe if I love him enough, he'll choose me. Thank God she didn't listen to that voice. She chose anger, chose war. People asked how she could trust again. The answer was simple. Darkness taught her to recognize light. Vadim taught her what love is not. Love is not a secret plan, not turning someone into kefi so as not to eclipse yourself. Love is Vitaly carving a crooked amber cat. Love is her father standing in court. Love is paying for treatment for the child of the man who broke your heart. Snezana, look. Vitaly shouted from the beach. It's flying. The kite rose into the sky over the Baltic Sea, fighting the wind, gaining height until it caught the current and began to dance against the clouds. Snezana Fyodorovna Tikhomirova, mother, general director, wife, a woman who didn't let a silly prank turn against her.